April 1943. In Tokyo, the weight of defeat was beginning to press on the corridors of the Imperial Navy. The campaign for Guadalcanal had ended in disaster. Japanese naval aviation, once the most feared force in the Pacific, had been bled white in 6 months of attrition. Carriers lay at anchor, pilots buried or missing. Yet one man, more than any other, still embodied the Navy's confidence and its sense of destiny. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Born into a humble samurai family in Niigata Prefecture, Yamamoto was unlike any of his peers. He had studied at Harvard from 1919 to 1921, lived in Boston boarding houses, and traveled across the United States. He watched Henry Ford's factories, witnessed Wall Street's rhythm, and toured Texas oil fields. Later, as Japan's naval attaché in Washington, he played poker with congressmen and businessmen. More than any other Japanese officer, Yamamoto understood the industrial weight of the United States. Should hostilities break out, he warned Japan's leaders in 1940, "I will run wild for 6 months. After that, I can promise nothing." His prediction was exact. Pearl Harbor, his daring gamble, stunned America. But midway through 1942, the 6 months ended with Midway, and Yamamoto's fleet crippled. By early 1943, with the Solomons slipping away, Yamamoto planned a bold inspection tour. His presence, he believed, would rally weary garrisons. On April 18th, he scheduled a flight to Bougainville, personally visiting forward bases to stiffen morale. True to character, the admiral insisted on punctuality. His staff begged him to reconsider. The skies around the Solomons were increasingly dangerous. Yamamoto refused. "A commander must share the same fate as his men," he declared. His itinerary, down to the minute, was transmitted in the Japanese Navy's operational cipher JN-25. In Pearl Harbor's underground bunkers, another drama was unfolding. American cryptanalysts, veterans of the breaking of JN-25 months earlier, intercepted the message. It was precise. Departure from Rabaul at 6 a.m. Arrival at Balalay Airstrip at 9:45 a.m. Escort of 60 fighters, 2 G-4M Betty bombers, 1 carrying Yamamoto himself. Commander Joseph Rochefort's successors at Station Hypo forwarded the decrypt to Admiral Chester Nimitz. The implications were staggering. For the first time, the United States had the exact movements of the enemy's supreme commander. Nimitz related to Admiral William F. Halsey, whose South Pacific Command had borne the brunt of Guadalcanal. Halsey, known as Bull to friend and foe alike, immediately recognized the opportunity. But the decision lay higher. In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt read the intercept with uncharacteristic silence. Then he gave his approval. Yamamoto must not return from Bougainville. The order filtered back across the Pacific in utmost secrecy. To preserve the code-breaking advantage, official papers would later claim Yamamoto's location had been learned through aerial reconnaissance. In truth, it was a calculated act of intelligence assassination, one of the most precise missions of the war. Planning began within 13th Fighter Command on Guadalcanal. Only one aircraft in the U.S. arsenal had the range to reach Bougainville, intercept the Admiral's flight, and return, Lockheed's P-38 Lightning. Its twin Allison engines and turbo superchargers could carry it hundreds of miles over open ocean, a feat no P-40 or F-4F could manage. The mission would belong to the 339th Fighter Squadron, veterans of long-range escort duty. For the men who would fly it, secrecy was absolute. Their target was not a convoy nor an airfield, but a single man whose face appeared on every Japanese propaganda poster. In the words of squadron leader Major John Mitchell, it was the strangest order of the war, not to destroy ships, not to cripple bases, but to kill one individual. As April 18th approached, the stage was set. Yamamoto, punctual to the minute, flying into a trap drawn from broken code. Across thousands of miles of Pacific, 18 P-38 Lightnings waited on Guadalcanal's airstrip, engines silent, pilots sworn to silence. A gamble was about to unfold, one that would cut the beating heart out of Japan's naval air power. At Guadalcanal's Henderson Field, the air smelled of hot oil and coral dust. It was here, in mid-April 1943, that the order reached the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron. The instructions were blunt, delivered in sealed packets. They were to intercept and destroy a Japanese bomber flight over Bougainville. Only a handful of officers knew the truth that one of those bombers carried Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself. The mission demanded precision few had ever attempted. From Guadalcanal to the intercept point stretched more than 400 miles of open Pacific. A round trip of 800 miles was beyond the reach of most American fighters. The P-40s and Wildcats that had defended Henderson for months simply lacked the legs. Only Lockheed's new twin-engine interceptor, the P-38 Lightning, could hope to make the journey. Designed by Clarence Kelly Johnson at Lockheed's Burlank plant, the Lightning had been built for speed and range. Twin Allison V-1710 engines mounted in streamlined booms drove counter-rotating propellers, eliminating torque. Turbo superchargers allowed the aircraft to perform at high altitude, and its central nacelle carried a heavy punch, a 20mm cannon and 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns, all firing straight down the nose. Unlike the wing-mounted armament of most fighters, the Lightning's concentrated fire made it lethal in head-on passes. But for all its power, the P-38 was still temperamental. Engines overheated, compressibility at high speed could lock controls. Long flights over open water strained fuel calculations. The men of the 339th would have to trust their machines as never before. 18 pilots were chosen. The group's commander, Major John W. Mitchell, would lead. Among the selected were Captain Thomas G. Lamphere, Jr., a confident and outspoken flyer, and First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber, quiet but deadly accurate. Besby F. Holmes, Raymond K. Hine, and others rounded out the formation. All were told this mission came directly from Admiral Halsey himself. None were told the name of their target. Secrecy was paramount. Mission planners worked in a locked hut at Fighter Command. Maps were spread, fuel tables calculated down to the gallon. Every pilot received precise timing, departure at dawn, climb to cruising altitude, a dogleg route to avoid Japanese patrols, and arrival on Bougainville at exactly 9:34 a.m., the moment Yamamoto's plane would descend. If they were late, the target would be gone. If they were early, Japanese scouts might raise the alarm. Success depended on precision to the minute. Mitchell's formation would be divided into two elements. The killer group, 4 Lightnings, would break ahead to attack the bombers. The cover group, the remaining 14, would hold altitude to fend off the Zero escort. The flight plan called for radio silence. Once airborne, only Mitchell's voice would direct the formation. The pilots studied their charts under lantern light, measuring the distance to Bougainville with dividers. Each new fuel would be razor-thin. The P-38s would carry drop tanks, 165 gallons each, but even with them, there was little margin for error. The Japanese, for their part, prepared as though the flight were routine. Yamamoto's staff arranged 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers from the 705th Air Group, escorted by 6 A6M Zeros of the 204th Air Group. In their diaries, pilots noted the assignment casually. None suspected that their encrypted signal had been read by Americans thousands of miles away. On Guadalcanal, ground crews worked through the night. Fuel lines hissed. Brownings were belted with armor-piercing rounds, and cannon drums loaded. The P-38s were pushed into position along Henderson's airstrip. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 18, 1943, the pilots gathered for briefing. Major Mitchell laid it out simply. "Gentlemen, we have a job to do. We will not fail." Engines roared awake, echoing against the hills. One by one, 18 Lightnings lifted into the humid air, their twin booms gleaming in the morning sun. To the men strapped into those cockpits, the mission was still cloaked in mystery. Only later would they understand that this was not just another patrol. They were flying toward a meeting with history, the day America's long arm would reach across the Pacific to strike at the architect of Pearl Harbor himself. The sun had barely lifted above the horizon when the 18 P-38 Lightnings skimmed the waves north of Guadalcanal. At less than 50 feet above the water, they flew in a disciplined line, their propeller wash throwing faint ripples across the Pacific. The mission demanded silence, patience, and above all, precision. Each man knew fuel was limited. Every deviation in course meant less time over Bougainville and less margin for the return flight. Major John W. Mitchell kept the formation tight. He checked his wristwatch constantly. Timing was everything. At 7 a.m., the Lightnings had cleared the northern tip of the New Georgia Group. They banked west, flying low over open water to avoid Japanese spotters. No radios crackled. The only sound was the deep, steady drone of twin Allison engines. Far to the northwest, another flight was beginning its journey. At Rabaul, the forward command post of Japan's combined fleet, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto boarded a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber from the 705th Air Group. Bomber. His staff had arranged every detail. Departure at 6 o'clock sharp, a second bomber carrying his Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Ugaki Matome, and 6 A-6M-0 fighters from the 204th Air Group. Yamamoto, in full dress uniform, carried his katana and sidearm. His punctuality was legendary. The staff had built the schedule around it. Japanese diaries later revealed that some officers begged Yamamoto to alter the plan. American air strength in the Solomons was growing, and the route was perilously exposed. Yamamoto refused. "A commander must never break faith with his men," he told his staff. "If they expect me, I will be there." It was this very predictability that would seal his fate. At 8 a.m., the U.S. Lightnings crossed the final stretch of ocean and sighted Bougainville on the horizon. The island rose from the sea in jagged green ridges and volcanic peaks shrouded in mist. Mitchell gave a hand signal. The formation split. 4 aircraft, Lanpier, Barber, Holmes, and Hine, peeled off as the killer group, climbing slightly above the others. The remaining 14 formed a protective arc, ready to engage the Zero escorts once contact came. Back at Rabaul, Yamamoto's flight droned southward at 6,500 feet. Japanese records mark the admiral glancing over his shoulder at the waters below, remarking on the beauty of the Solomons. At precisely 9:34 a.m., the formation approached Bougainville's southwest coast. Yamamoto's insistence on punctuality had brought him exactly into the path plotted by American intelligence. Mitchell's wristwatch struck 9:34. On the horizon, specks appeared against the morning sky. Barber later recalled the moment. "I looked up, and there they were, like ducks in a row." The Americans climbed sharply, throttles wide open. The Zeros had not seen them yet. In Yamamoto's bomber, the crew reported sighting aircraft approaching from below and starboard. At first, they believed them to be Japanese reinforcements. Seconds later, the mistake became clear. Lanpier rolled his P-38 into a steep climb, lining up the lead G4M Betty bomber. His tracers arced into the sky, a spray of .5 caliber rounds converging toward the enemy aircraft. In the second bomber, Lieutenant Rex T. Barber pressed forward, guns leveled on Yamamoto's plane itself. The Japanese formation reacted too late. Escorting Zeros from the 204th Air Group broke upward in surprise, diving to cut off the Americans. But the lightnings had struck at the precise moment calculated back on Guadalcanal. The ambush was already underway. Lanfear's burst caught the first Betty broadside. Its wing flared, fragments spiraling into the jungle below. Yamamoto's own bomber veered as Barber's P-38 swept across its path. Barber pressed the trigger, 20mm shells and Brownings hammering the fuselage. Survivors later described Yamamoto's aircraft banking steeply before trailing smoke, losing altitude rapidly. From the ground, Japanese soldiers stationed near Moila Point saw the spectacle. One diary recovered after the war noted, "Enemy fighters descended suddenly. Our commander's plane struck by cannon fire. It fell into the forest with a great sound." Within minutes, the formation dissolved into chaos. Vice Admiral Ugaki's bomber, flying behind Yamamoto's, plunged desperately toward the sea, its crew attempting to evade Barber's closing fire. Ugaki survived, though his aircraft landed crippled. Yamamoto's would not. The Zero escorts, finally turning the tables, dove into the melee. Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine, flying in the killer group, was last seen engaged with several Japanese fighters. His wingman, Holmes, reported him breaking low over the water, smoke trailing from his engines. Hine never returned. Neither his aircraft nor his body was found. For the Americans, the mission's outcome was decisive but costly. Within 10 minutes, Yamamoto's Betty had vanished into the jungle, burning on impact. Japanese accounts describe the crash site. Wreckage scattered, the admiral found still in his seat, sword at his side. His staff officers perished with him. In the skies above, dogfights raged as the covering group engaged the Zeros. The P-38's heavy firepower and diving speed kept them alive, but fuel gauges dipped dangerously low. Mitchell gave the recall order. With the objective accomplished, survival now meant finding the long route home across 400 miles of ocean. The Japanese escorts, stunned at the precision of the ambush, radioed Rabaul in fragments. Reports reached headquarters by noon. The commander-in-chief of the combined fleet had not returned. Later, debate would consume American veterans. Lanfear claimed the fatal shots. Barber insisted they were his. Both filed after-action reports asserting responsibility. Declassified Japanese war diaries decades later would favor Barber's account, noting the angles of attack. But in April 1943, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Yamamoto was dead. On the return flight, silence filled American cockpits. They had lost one of their own, and none yet realized the magnitude of their victory. To them, it was a mission accomplished, an ambush executed exactly as briefed. Only later would they learn their target had been the architect of Pearl Harbor himself. For Japan, the blow was immediate. Ugaki, shaken but alive, assumed temporary command. Orders went out to conceal Yamamoto's death from the rank and file. Yet word leaked quickly. By nightfall, whispers spread across the fleet. The admiral was gone. Over Bougainville, the wreckage of the G4M smoldered in the jungle, guarded by soldiers until recovery parties arrived. Among the charred fuselage lay Yamamoto's uniform cap and ceremonial katana. His final journey had ended not with triumphal inspection, but with an ambush engineered half a world away. Operation Vengeance was complete. When Vice Admiral Ugaki's crippled Betty limped back to Rabaul on the afternoon of April 18, 1943, the Japanese Naval Command confronted the unthinkable. Yamamoto was missing. For hours, communications officers demanded updates from Bougainville. The fragmented reports from surviving escorts confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The commander-in-chief of the combined fleet had not survived the ambush. The news struck Rabaul like a thunderclap. Admiral Junichi Kusaka, commander of the Southeast Area Fleet, immediately convened a council of officers. According to captured diaries, silence dominated the room until one staffer whispered, "This must be concealed. Morale cannot withstand it." Orders went out to restrict information to the highest echelons. Yet the concealment was temporary. By April 20th, recovery parties had reached the crash site near Moila Point. Yamamoto's body was recovered with his sword and sidearm intact, seated upright in the wreckage. Japanese records note that his watch had stopped at 9:35 a.m., the moment of impact. He was flown back to Rabaul under strict guard. The ceremonial atmosphere surrounding his remains contrasted sharply with the chaos that had ended his life. Soldiers stood at rigid attention as his coffin, draped in the rising sun flag, was carried aboard a transport aircraft. At Rabaul, Ugaki supervised his embalming and prepared his return to Tokyo. For the Japanese government, Yamamoto's death was both a tragedy and a strategic catastrophe. Since 1941, he had symbolized the Navy's offensive spirit, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor, and the architect of the decisive battle doctrine. His loss, just 16 months after the attack that brought the United States into the war, could not be hidden indefinitely. On May 3, 1943, Tokyo announced to the public that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had fallen gloriously in battle. Newspapers carried somber headlines bordered in black. Radio Tokyo broadcast martial music, followed by announcements of his posthumous promotion to Marshal Admiral of the Navy. The propaganda line emphasized sacrifice. Yamamoto had died inspecting the front, leading from the air, a warrior to the end. The funeral procession became a national event. Tens of thousands lined the streets as Yamamoto's ashes were carried from the Navy Ministry to Hibiya Park, then to the temple at Tama Cemetery. Emperor Hirohito himself attended the state funeral, bowing deeply before Yamamoto's portrait. The symbolism was powerful. Yamamoto had been a reluctant warrior, educated in the United States, skeptical of war with America, but he became a martyr to the cause he had warned against. His death elevated him to near-mythical status within Japanese culture, but it left the Imperial Navy without its most experienced strategist. American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications in the weeks following his death. Decrypts revealed confusion at the highest levels, debates over succession, questions about whether to maintain the offensive in the Solomons or withdraw. Morale among air units at Rabaul dropped visibly. Pilots no longer spoke of certain victory. Instead, they asked how long the empire could endure. For the Allies, Yamamoto's death was initially kept secret. Washington released no immediate statements, ensuring Japanese uncertainty. Only after Tokyo's announcement did American newspapers quietly print stories confirming his demise, framing it as justice for Pearl Harbor. Privately, U.S. commanders understood the deeper significance. Japan had lost the one leader capable of balancing naval tradition with modern air power. The psychological impact reverberated far beyond the Pacific. At the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium, former Japanese officers admitted that Yamamoto's loss was the point when naval aviation ceased to believe in final victory. Without his guiding hand, coordination between Navy and Army air forces faltered, leading to piecemeal operations that bled resources away. By the summer of 1943, Allied pilots noticed the change. Enemy formations still fought fiercely, but their tactical discipline declined. U.S. after-action reports from 13th Fighter Command described Japanese air attacks as less coordinated, more reckless in the months following the ambush. What Yamamoto had built at Pearl Harbor, the illusion of invincibility, was shattered permanently. In Tokyo, the shockwaves lingered long after the funeral drums faded. Operation Vengeance had achieved more than the elimination of one man. It had decapitated the soul of Japanese naval aviation. The removal of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto from Japan's war effort was more than a personal tragedy. It was a strategic rupture. In the spring of 1943, The Imperial Japanese Navy was already reeling from Guadalcanal and the slow strangulation of its forward bases. Yamamoto's death stripped the fleet of the one commander who balanced boldness with pragmatism, and the effects rippled across every echelon of Japanese naval aviation. At Combined Fleet Headquarters in Tokyo, Vice Admiral Mineichi Koga was appointed as Yamamoto's successor. Though competent, Koga lacked Yamamoto's charisma and international understanding. Post-war Japanese testimonies revealed that many officers doubted whether Koga could maintain unity within the fleet. One staff officer later reflected, "He was diligent, but he inspired no fear in the Americans and no awe among our men." The first challenge Koga faced was whether to maintain the offensive in the Solomons. Yamamoto's strategy had been one of aggressive presence, constant air raids from Rabaul, attrition of American forces, and the hope of luring U.S. carriers into decisive battle. Without him, the Navy's resolve wavered. Koga considered consolidating forces for homeland defense, a shift that signaled the gradual end of Japan's forward momentum. Intelligence intercepts confirmed this uncertainty. U.S. Navy codebreakers at Pearl Harbor's Station Hypo and Washington's OP-20G read Japanese messages debating force allocations. Decrypts from May 1943 revealed internal divisions. Navy staff officers advocated reinforcing Rabaul, while Army commanders pushed for conserving resources in New Guinea. Yamamoto had been a bridge between these competing visions. Without him, friction only deepened. The immediate battlefield consequences became visible during the summer of 1943. Allied forces launched Operation Cartwheel, the twin offensives in New Georgia and New Guinea aimed at isolating Rabaul. In Yamamoto's absence, Japanese naval aviation failed to mount a coherent response. Post-action reports from 13th Fighter Command described Japanese air attacks as fragmented, lacking in concentrated leadership. Pilots still fought with courage, but coordination had visibly weakened. At Rabaul, morale never fully recovered. Diaries from the 11th Air Fleet reveal a steady decline in confidence. One officer wrote in June, "Since the Admiral's death, direction is absent. We fly, we fight, but we do not believe." Even Ugaki, who had survived the ambush, confided to his journal that he could not fill Yamamoto's shadow. American commanders understood the magnitude of their success. Admiral Chester Nimitz noted in his official reports that the loss of Yamamoto has deprived the Japanese of their most dangerous strategist. General George C. Kenney of the 5th Air Force later commented that Japanese operations after April 1943 seemed reactive rather than planned, a sign of faltering leadership. Beyond immediate operations, the broader trajectory of the Pacific War shifted. Yamamoto had long warned Tokyo that Japan's industrial inferiority made prolonged war impossible. Without his voice, Japan's naval leadership grew more rigid, clinging to outdated doctrines while the U.S. surged forward with production and training. By the end of 1943, the United States had fielded hundreds of new aircraft monthly, P-38 Lightnings, F-6F Hellcats, and B-24 Liberators, while Japan struggled to replace even a fraction of its losses. Captured Japanese officers after the war repeatedly identified Yamamoto's death as a turning point. During interrogations in 1945, Rear Admiral Tomioka Sadatoshi admitted, "When he fell, the soul of the combined fleet fell with him. Thereafter, we fought only with shells, not with spirit." Meanwhile, in Washington, Operation Vengeance became a closely guarded secret. Official communiques made no mention of the intelligence breakthrough, protecting the fact that American codebreakers had penetrated JN-25. Only a small circle of officers understood that Yamamoto's death was both a tactical success and a strategic deception operation, designed to keep Japan unaware of the extent of Allied cryptanalysis. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later observed that Yamamoto's removal accelerated the erosion of Japanese naval aviation effectiveness. Without strong leadership to integrate carrier, land-based, and Army air forces, Japan's air campaigns devolved into piecemeal efforts. By the time of the Marianas Battles in 1944, the Imperial Navy no longer resembled the force that had struck Pearl Harbor. In hindsight, Yamamoto's death was less about one man's absence than the collapse of a fragile balance. He had embodied Japan's last chance to fight a modern war with coherence. With him gone, tradition reasserted itself, officers clinging to decisive battle, while industry and strategy crumbled around them. Operation Vengeance thus marked not only a successful ambush, but the beginning of Japan's irreversible strategic decline. The mission did not just eliminate a commander, it severed the thread holding together Japan's naval aviation at its most vulnerable moment. For the Americans who executed Operation Vengeance, the mission was a triumph of precision, intelligence, and courage. Yet within the halls of Washington and the offices of military headquarters in the Pacific, its meaning was debated for months after April 1943. Yamamoto's death was celebrated in public as justice for Pearl Harbor, but behind closed doors it raised questions about precedent, secrecy, and the ethics of targeted killing. The first priority for U.S. commanders was silence. Franklin Roosevelt's administration understood that revealing how Yamamoto had been located risked compromising the fragile advantage of codebreaking. The Navy's OP-20G unit and Station Hypo had labored for years to break JN-25, the Japanese naval code. Operation Vengeance represented the most dramatic proof of their success. If Tokyo learned the truth, every cipher could be changed, and the Allies would lose their most powerful intelligence asset. Thus, when news of Yamamoto's death began circulating in May 1943, official American statements were carefully worded. Press releases credited aerial patrols and combat action without any mention of decrypts. The story was framed as chance encounter rather than deliberate assassination. Newspapers, from the New York Times to the Chicago Tribune, described Yamamoto's demise as the fate of a man who dared to lead from the front. Only later did speculation surface that the mission had been planned with uncanny precision. Within the U.S. Army Air Forces, the mission was held up as an example of operational daring. General Henry Hap Arnold praised the 339th Fighter Squadron for its execution, while 13th Fighter Command reports emphasized the difficulty of flying over 400 miles at wave-top level to intercept Yamamoto's aircraft. Official victory credits were awarded to Captain Thomas Lanphier and First Lieutenant Rex Barber, though controversy over which pilot fired the fatal shots simmered for decades. The dispute reflected the tension between personal glory and collective achievement that often colored American air combat records. In Congress and among the American public, Yamamoto's death was seen as retribution. Pearl Harbor had scarred the national psyche, and Yamamoto was widely portrayed as its architect. Editorial cartoons depicted him struck down by American pilots, justice delivered from the skies. Few dwelt on the legality of targeting an individual commander. In the atmosphere of 1943, the mission symbolized both vengeance and victory. Yet in academic and military circles, the ethics of the operation were quietly debated. Was Operation Vengeance assassination or legitimate warfare? The distinction mattered. U.S. policy officially prohibited political assassination, but Yamamoto was a uniformed military officer traveling in combat conditions within a theater of war. Daniel Howman, in his later analysis, Killing Yamamoto, 2015, would argue that the operation fell squarely within the laws of armed conflict. Post-war commentary from naval historians agreed. Yamamoto was a combatant, not a civilian leader, and his death was no different than sinking a flagship. The mission also highlighted the growing role of intelligence in modern warfare. Historians have since noted that Operation Vengeance was one of the first successful examples of actionable intelligence, the fusion of code-breaking with direct military strike. U.S. Navy officers who participated in post-war symposiums recalled the lesson vividly. Intelligence was no longer simply for defense, but a weapon to shape the battlefield itself. For the pilots who carried out the interception, the mission became a defining memory of their lives. At the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, surviving members of the 339th reflected on the weight of the moment. "We were just told to fly the mission," Barbara recalled. "It wasn't until later we understood who we had killed and what it meant for the war." Operation Vengeance also set a precedent in American military culture. The idea that a single individual's removal could alter the course of war became ingrained in strategic thought. During the Cold War, discussions of decapitation strikes often harkened back to Yamamoto. Though the technology would evolve, missiles and satellites replacing P-38s, the principle was remembered as having proven itself in the jungles of Bougainville.
In the end, for Americans, Yamamoto's death was more than an isolated mission. It symbolized a turning point in the Pacific, proof that the United States could reach deep into enemy territory with precision and decisiveness. Publicly, it was remembered as revenge for Pearl Harbor. Privately, it was recognized as the moment when intelligence, air power, and national will fused into a single lethal stroke. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto on April 18, 1943, has endured as one of the most consequential moments in the Pacific War. Operation Vengeance was, on its surface, a daring aerial ambush, but in the decades since, it has come to symbolize the intersection of intelligence, technology, and human leadership in modern warfare. The mission's legacy stretches beyond the jungles of Bougainville into the way nations remember war itself. For Japan, Yamamoto became both a martyr and a warning. In the immediate aftermath, his death was used as propaganda, his ashes paraded through Tokyo, his name invoked as a rallying cry. Yet in private, officers admitted that something vital had been lost. Post-war interrogations revealed that Yamamoto had been the only figure capable of tempering Japan's hubris with sober realism. Without him, the Imperial Navy slid more quickly into doctrinal rigidity and operational collapse. Veterans at the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium repeatedly cited his death as the moment morale fractured irreparably. Among Japanese aviators, Yamamoto's absence was felt in more personal ways. Captured diaries from the 204th Air Group describe a shift in tone after April 1943. Before, entries brimmed with determination and talk of final victory. After, they dwelled on futility. "We fly on," one pilot wrote in June, "but the admiral who believed in us is gone. We are shadows chasing his memory." In the United States, the operation entered the canon of military lore. It was remembered as the mission that brought justice for Pearl Harbor, though the truth that Yamamoto had privately opposed the war he came to symbolize was often overlooked. American pilots were celebrated in wartime press releases, their interception hailed as proof of U.S. daring and precision. By the 1950s and 1960s, historians began to explore the deeper implications. Was Yamamoto's death a decisive blow to Japanese naval aviation, or merely symbolic? The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded in 1946 that Yamamoto's removal hastened Japan's decline, but it was not the sole factor. Industrial imbalance and attritional losses mattered more. Still, even the survey acknowledged the psychological shock. As one analyst noted, an army fights not only with materiel, but with belief. Yamamoto's death extinguished belief. For the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron, Operation Vengeance remained the most memorable sortie of their war. Veterans reunions decades later often circled back to that April morning. 6 P-38 Lightnings flying low over the sea, knowing only that their target was a very important passenger. Many confessed that only afterward did they grasp the mission's historic importance. But as one man said, "In that moment, we felt like the air itself was on our side." Wait.
Thomas Lanphier later remarked, "We didn't just shoot down an airplane, we changed the direction of the war." The debate over who fired the fatal rounds, Lanphier or Rex Barber, endured long after the war. Both pilots received official credit, but post-war analyses of wreckage and trajectories suggested Barber's guns may have struck Yamamoto's Betty. The controversy reflected how even in moments of collective triumph, personal rivalries could shape memory. Still, for the broader story, the identity of the marksman mattered less than the outcome, the removal of Japan's most formidable naval strategist. Culturally, Yamamoto's death became a touchstone in discussions of leadership. In Japan, he was remembered not simply as the architect of Pearl Harbor, but as the reluctant warrior who warned that war with America would be ruinous. In the United States, he was often portrayed as the embodiment of Japanese aggression. Over time, historians sought to reconcile these images, recognizing that Yamamoto's brilliance and foresight made him both dangerous to the Allies and tragic for Japan. In modern strategic studies, Operation Vengeance is cited as an early example of a decapitation strike. The logic that eliminating a single leader can alter the trajectory of conflict has influenced military thinking from the Cold War to the present. Yet historians caution that its success in 1943 owed much to timing. Japan was already stretched thin, its resources dwindling. Yamamoto's death accelerated a decline that had already begun. Ultimately, the true legacy of Operation Vengeance lies not in whether it broke Japanese naval aviation by itself, but in how it crystallized the changing nature of war. It demonstrated the power of intelligence-led operations, the vulnerability of even the most protected leaders, and the fragility of morale in the face of sudden loss. When veterans from both sides gathered in Hawaii in 1985, the atmosphere was reflective rather than bitter. Former Japanese officers spoke of their admiration for Yamamoto, while American pilots recalled the nerve and precision required to bring him down. Together, they acknowledged the enduring truth that history is shaped not only by fleets and battles, but by the fate of individuals whose lives and deaths reverberate across nations. Yamamoto's passing marked the twilight of Japanese naval supremacy. From that April morning onward, the empire's skies belonged increasingly to the Allies. Operation Vengeance had succeeded beyond its tactical purpose. It had ended the era of Japanese dominance in the Pacific and ushered in a new age of American ascendancy.